Stop scrubbing. Right now. Put the sponge down. If you've got a layer of grease on your kitchen cabinets, thick enough that you can drag your fingernail through it and leave a trail, scrubbing is the worst thing you can do. I've walked into hundreds of kitchens where someone spent an entire Saturday on their hands and knees with a Brillo pad, arms burning, and the cabinets still looked dull and streaky when they finished. They didn't fail because they didn't work hard enough. They failed because grease doesn't respond to elbow grease. It responds to chemistry. Here's the thing nobody tells you. That gunk on your cabinets isn't dirt. Dirt you can scrub off. What's sitting on your cabinet doors is a bonded layer of cooking oil, airborne fat particles, and dust that's been baking onto the wood or laminate every time you turn on your stove. Every stir-fry, every bacon sundae, every pot of frying oil sends a fine mist into the air. Most of it lands right where you can't see it. The top of your cabinets, the sides near the stove, the grooves in raised panel doors where a wipe-down rag glides right over the flat parts but never digs into the crevice. I've seen kitchens where the countertops were spotless, the floor was mopped weekly, and the cabinet crown molding above the stove had a quarter-inch of solidified grease dust nobody had touched in 3 years. Here's why people miss it until it's bad. Grease buildup happens in layers, and each new layer is thin enough to go unnoticed. You cook dinner, a little mist settles, you wipe the counter but not the cabinet face, and that layer dries. Tomorrow, another thin layer goes on top of it. This repeats for months. Nobody looks at their cabinets and thinks, today's the day it crossed the line from disgusting to dull and sticky, because there is no single day. It's gradual, the same way a windshield gets hazy from the inside without you noticing until you drive at night into oncoming headlights and suddenly can't see a thing. By the time someone finally notices, usually because a guest touches a cabinet and makes a face, or because they're repainting and can't get primer to stick, the grease has months or years to cure. And once it cures, it's not the same substance anymore. Fresh grease is soft and lifts easily. Cured grease has undergone what's basically a slow oxidation process, similar to how oil paint hardens. It's chemically different, physically bonded to the surface, and it will not respond to a basic all-purpose spray no matter how much you spray or how hard you push. That's the trap most people fall into. They treat month-old grease and year-old grease the same way with the same product and wonder why one wipes off in 10 seconds and the other doesn't budge after 20 minutes of scrubbing. Why it happens. I want to explain it the way I understand it from doing the work, not from a textbook, because the textbook explanation misses the part that actually matters for cleaning it. Cooking oil, whether it's from a pan, a fryer, or even just the steam off a boiling pot, contains fat molecules. Fat molecules are non-polar. They don't mix with water, which is why oil and water separate in a jar no matter how long you shake it. When that greasy mist lands on your cabinet, it's sitting there as a thin, oily film. In this stage, fresh and soft, water alone won't touch it because water can't break into a non-polar substance. This is why people wipe with just a wet rag and end up smearing the grease around instead of removing it. You're not lifting it off the surface, you're just relocating it. Now here's the part that changes everything. Once that oil sits exposed to heat and air for weeks or months, it starts to oxidize. Oxidation is the same process that makes olive oil go rancid or makes a cast iron pan build seasoning. The fat molecules react with oxygen and start forming new, longer chemical bonds. Those bonds are what make old grease sticky, dark, and eventually hard. It's not just dirt sitting on the surface anymore. It's a polymerized film that's chemically anchored itself into the pores of the wood grain or the microscopic texture of the laminate. This is why heat matters so much in the fix, and I'll get into that in the solution section, but understand the logic now. Heat re-softens those bonds. It doesn't undo the oxidation, but it loosens the grip enough that a proper degreaser, something with the right pH and the right surfactants, can get underneath the film and lift it, rather than you having to physically grind it off with a pad. I've tested this on literally hundreds of jobs, from single-family kitchens to industrial cafeteria lines, and the pattern never changes. Cold grease fights you. Warm grease gives up. That single fact is the whole foundation of the method I'm about to walk you through. Common mistakes. Let's talk about what most people try first, because I guarantee at least one of these is something you've already done. Mistake 1. Dish soap and a wet rag. This is the instinctive move, and I get why. Dish soap cuts grease on your dishes, so it should work on cabinets, right? The problem is concentration and contact time. When you're washing a plate, that plate is submerged and the soap has direct, sustained contact with a thin, fresh layer of grease. On a cabinet, you're wiping a diluted soap solution across a vertical or horizontal surface for maybe 2 or 3 seconds per square foot before it dries. There's no soak time. Dish soap needs a minute or 2 of dwell time on cured grease to start breaking the surface tension, and almost nobody gives it that. So people end up doing 20 passes with a rag, getting frustrated, and assuming the grease is impossible, when really the product just never had time to do its job. Mistake 2. Scrubbing harder with an abrasive pad. This is the one that actually causes damage. When basic cleaning doesn't work, the natural instinct is to apply more force. Grab a Scotch-Brite pad, a magic eraser, or even steel wool, and go at it aggressively. On painted or stained wood cabinets, this is how you end up with dull patches, swirl marks, or worn-through spots where the finish is thinner than the surrounding area. I've been called into homes to fix cabinets that were structurally fine, but visually ruined because someone scrubbed a section back to bare wood, trying to get through grease that should have been chemically dissolved, not physically abraded. On laminate cabinets, aggressive scrubbing can create micro-scratches that actually hold more grease going forward, because now you've got texture for the film to grip onto. You end up making the long-term problem worse while attacking the short-term one. Mistake 3. Reaching for straight vinegar or a harsh degreaser without testing it first. Vinegar has a cult following in cleaning circles because it's natural and it does cut through some buildup. But vinegar is acidic, and on certain cabinet finishes, particularly waxed wood, some painted finishes, and certain laminates, repeated acid exposure will dull the sheen or even start to break down the finish over time. I've seen cabinets where someone used a vinegar water spray weekly as their go-to cleaner, and the finish went from glossy to cloudy in a way that no amount of polishing could fully bring back. Same story with commercial degreasers pulled straight off the shelf at full strength. Some of these are formulated for stainless steel and hard tile, not for finished wood, and they'll strip the protective top coat right along with the grease. The mistake isn't using a degreaser, it's using the wrong one at the wrong strength without testing it first on a hidden spot, like the inside edge of a cabinet door. There's one more thing almost everyone gets wrong that I haven't mentioned yet, and it's honestly the step that determines whether this whole job takes 10 minutes or 2 hours. I'll cover exactly what that is when we get into the method, because it changes the entire outcome. The solution. This is the method I've used on everything from a single grimy cabinet door to a full commercial kitchen that hadn't been degreased in 5 years. It works in stages. Don't skip stages, even if a section looks not that bad. The whole point is consistency, so you're not guessing which cabinets need extra attention halfway through. Stage 1. Gather the right materials. You need 4 things: a microfiber cloth, not paper towels, not an old t-shirt, an actual microfiber cloth, because the weave structure grabs and holds grease particles instead of just pushing them around. A second dry microfiber for buffing, a degreaser that's actually rated for wood or cabinetry. I use a citrus-based enzymatic degreaser for most jobs because it breaks down oil chemically, without the alkalinity that can strip a finish. If you don't have access to that, a diluted solution of warm water with a small amount of dish soap works as a backup, but it will take more passes. And you need hot water, close to as hot as your tap will give you, in a small bowl or spray bottle. That last one surprises people. The water temperature is not a minor detail. Remember what I explained earlier about oxidized fat bonds loosening under heat? A degreaser applied cold is working against a rigid, hardened film. The same degreaser applied warm is working against a softened, more workable one. This single adjustment cuts your work time by more than half on heavily built-up cabinets. My grandfather ran commercial kitchens for 30 years, and the one rule he never let slide was this: never degrease cold. It's the difference between a job that takes 10 minutes and one that takes an hour of fighting the surface. Stage 2. The heat pass. Before you apply any product, wipe the cabinet down with your microfiber cloth dampened in the hot water alone. No soap yet. This isn't about cleaning, it's about warming the surface and starting to soften that top layer of grease so the degreaser that comes next can actually penetrate instead of sitting on top of a hard shell. Do this in sections, roughly 2 or 3 cabinet doors at a time, rather than trying to heat your whole kitchen at once. The water cools fast, so working in small zones keeps the temperature advantage where you need it. This is the step almost everyone skips. They go straight for the strongest cleaner they own and wonder why it's fighting them. Warming the surface first is the difference between a degreaser doing its job in 90 seconds and a degreaser sitting there for 10 minutes doing almost nothing. Stage 3, apply and let it dwell. Spray or wipe your degreaser onto the warmed section. Here's the part people rush, and it's the single biggest reason DIY attempts fail. You need to let the product dwell, meaning sit untouched, for a minimum of 90 seconds to 2 minutes on moderate buildup and up to 5 minutes on heavily cured grease. This is not wasted time. This is the chemical reaction happening. The surfactants in the degreaser are working their way into the fat bonds and breaking them apart. If you wipe immediately after spraying, you're not giving the chemistry a chance to finish its job, and you'll end up doing 3 or 4 extra passes to accomplish what one properly timed pass could have done. While it's dwelling, don't just stand there. Move to the next section and do your heat pass on that one. This is how you get a full kitchen done efficiently instead of watching paint dry on one cabinet door at a time. Pro tip, if you're dealing with grease that's built up in the grooves of a raised panel or shaker-style door, wrap a section of your damp microfiber around the tip of a plastic putty knife or an old credit card. Never use metal for this. It'll scratch the finish. The soft edge lets you get into the groove without abrasion, and combined with the dwell time from the degreaser, that grooved grease that looks impossible to reach will come out in 1 or 2 passes instead of you picking at it with a toothpick for 20 minutes, which is what most people end up doing out of frustration. Stage 4, wipe, don't scrub. After the dwell time, take your microfiber cloth, still slightly damp with hot water, and wipe in a single direction rather than circular scrubbing motions. Circular motion tends to just redistribute loosened grease rather than lifting it fully off the cloth. A straight, overlapping wipe pattern, top to bottom or side to side, consistently pulls more product off in fewer passes. You should feel almost no resistance if the dwell time did its job. If you're still hitting resistance and having to press hard, that's your signal the grease was heavier than expected. Go back, reapply degreaser, and give it another 2 to 3 minutes of dwell time rather than forcing it with pressure. Stage 5, second pass on stubborn spots. Even with everything done right, certain zones, directly above the stove or a section that's gone years without attention, sometimes need a second full round of heat, degreaser, dwell, wipe. Don't treat this as failure. It's normal on heavily neglected areas, and it's still faster than a single scrub and fight approach. I tell people to think of it in layers, the same way the grease built up in layers over time. You're just running the process in reverse. Stage 6, dry buff. This step gets skipped constantly, and it's the one that determines whether your cabinets look professionally cleaned or just cleaned. Once the surface is clear of grease, go over the entire section with your dry microfiber cloth. This does 2 things. It removes any leftover moisture that could sit in the wood grain or laminate seams, and it brings back the natural sheen of the finish. Cabinets that are left to air dry after a wet cleaning almost always end up with a slightly dull, streaky look, even when the grease itself is fully gone. The dry buff is what makes people say the cabinets look new instead of just cleaned. A note on frequency. Once you've done this deep strip, don't let it get back to the same state. A quick wipe down with a warm, slightly damp microfiber once a week, focused specifically on the cabinets nearest your stove, will keep grease in that soft, easy-to-remove stage permanently. You'll never again face the cured, bonded-on layer that takes real effort to break through. Prevention here takes about 90 seconds a week. The alternative is redoing this entire deep clean every year or 2. That's the full method, and if you go through it step by step, most kitchens will take you somewhere around 10 to 15 minutes per section of cabinets, even with heavy buildup, because the heat and dwell time are doing the actual work instead of your arm. If this saved you a weekend of scrubbing, hit subscribe. I put out a new video every week covering the stuff that actually works in real homes, not just what sounds good on paper. I've been doing this for over 20 years now, and I still learn something new on almost every job. So if you've got a cleaning problem that's been driving you crazy, drop it in the comments. I read every one, and there's a good chance it becomes the next video. If you've got grease buildup on your cabinets, there's a solid chance your range hood filter and the wall behind your stove are dealing with the same problem, just worse, since that's the area closest to the source. I've got a full video on stripping down a range hood filter without taking it apart or soaking it overnight, and it uses a version of the same heat and dwell method you just learned. Worth watching next if you want your whole cooking area looking the way it should, not just the cabinet doors. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.